Capcom's Tokyo Game Show presentation is right around the corner, and the drum beat is banging a little bit louder now than ever before for the full-on reveal, or at the very least, the introduction for Monster Hunter Generation 6, or Monster Hunter World 2, or Paradise, or Rise, and Sunbreak 2, whatever naming conventions aside, which are always a funny topic to discuss. I do think that there's a lot of excitement ongoing for this specific presentation that we're going to be getting in just a few days. However, that is not the only Monster Hunter related set of content that Capcom is currently working on, and thanks to Game Rant's latest article from Devin Ellis' friend, who has been tirelessly working on different Monster Hunter articles, there is a little bit of an interesting discussion to be had regarding how Capcom can still expand the Monster Hunter franchise into other venues. So we're not necessarily just talking expanding by introducing a brand new game for the latest generation of monsters, but also everything else that comes alongside it, being spin-offs, movies, and more things to come. In this article, they're going to be talking about regarding the resurgence of the popularity of the franchise and many different formulas. Of course, the excitement that players have seen since the launch of Monster Hunter Now, and of course, many spin-off ideas going into the future. I'm going to be leaving a link in the description below for the latest Game Rant article specifically for Monster Hunter, which I always find them to be a good read and an interesting set of topic discussions. So in the article, they simply mentioned that Monster Hunter is one of Capcom's more exciting franchises, and there are a fair amount of new directions that the game can take in the future. Monster Hunter has been a series that since the Renaissance with Monster Hunter World and Monster Hunter Rise. While traditionally has been popular in Japan, the series' rising profile overseas as well as open several new opportunities going forward. The next step forward for Monster Hunter could involve stepping out of its traditional blueprint. In fact, there are a lot of ways that Monster Hunter World can be rife for spin-off. The development of Niantic's mobile title, Monster Hunter Now, is an experiment for the series expand from the base formula. Monster Hunter's core gameplay is based on tracking monsters through sizable open environments and engaging in long, intense battles, requiring both strategy and reflexes to succeed. Monster Hunter Now is taking the same general idea and compressing it into a gaming experience that is more accessible for mobile players to take on a few minutes at a time. It is a direction that for sure offers something significantly different from Monster Hunter games, and it raises the question of what other spin-offs could accomplish. And there is a lot to be said regarding the very own developers from Niantic discussing when it comes to Monster Hunter Now's 90-second engagement limit, which they basically set upon. It doesn't matter what star monster you're fighting, it doesn't matter what tier monster you're fighting, it doesn't matter whether you're playing solo or you're playing co-op or you're just playing with randoms on the internet with your mobile device. You're still going to have that 90-second encounter. Is what they're tailoring the game about. They don't want you to sit there for 5 minutes tapping your phone and fight one monster. They want you to be in there and out of there as quickly as possible. And that is not what the traditional franchise has provided, not only in previous entries or previous generations or even previous consoles, but even the most recent releases like Rise, Sunbreak, and of course World and Iceborne. Hunts were relatively shorter than they have been in the past, but not by much. And you can still end up having 15-20 minutes encounters where, traditionally it used to be maybe 30, 40, 50 minutes. They're shorter now for sure, but they're never going to get to 90 seconds, since there is that big difference there. Now, obviously, Monster Hunter Now's early set of monsters maybe are just still soft tier. We haven't seen elders or anything like that as of yet. At the very least, regarding the roadmap or anything like that, we haven't seen any major reveals like that for now. That could change, of course, once the full reveal happens. But as of right now, we haven't seen that as of yet. Monster Hunter could see many spin-offs in the future, they mentioned. One of the decent spin-off ideas would be similar to Animal Crossing New Horizons creative features, or perhaps a Zoo Tycoon. A player could be tasked with creating an island and using as inhabitants for some Monster Hunter's species. They could design terrain, foliage, and food sources in accordance with their preference monster species, and let them roam free. It sounds like a fun idea for a free-range game, basically letting players have their own Monster Hunter-themed virtual terrarium. Such as game could also include challenges for players to create islands along certain guidelines or rehabilitate islands that are falling apart. I don't honestly see the direct connection there with Animal Crossing, but it is an interesting idea to have something where you are kind of taking care of the monsters but not necessarily hunting them in that regard. Monster Hunter Stories aside, with the Monsties, where you're not necessarily hunting the monsters themselves, but you're just kind of like becoming friends, although you're still at the end of the day battling with other monsters and still taking them down nonetheless. That game's premise always, I found that interesting, because you're still just fighting monsters at the end of the day, but only the monsters you like and you keep and you raise, those are the good ones. All the other random ones that you find in the world, those are the bad ones. I always found that premise a little bit funny, to say the least. They also mentioned in the article that Capcom could go and find inspiration by putting his own spin-off in live simulation gameplay of The Sims. Players could put themselves not in the shoes of a hunter, but instead in the life of a monster. They could choose their species and where to go have their nest and go about their life as their chosen beast. Survival would be most an obvious priority, so food, water, and shelter would be an important thing to take into account. It would have more of a survival theme in typical Sims gameplay. But Monster Hunter has so many fascinating creatures that are playing at the role that could provide remarkable fun. Now that one's an interesting one, but I do think it's just a different take on what the aforementioned one that they had with a habitat kind of like, simulator type of thing with Animal Crossing, where you're just kind of letting them roam free, except you're now in charge of the monsters themselves and you are trying to survive. It's the same idea, but a little bit of a different angle. The article continues. Another possibility could be come in the form of a new form of adventure in the vein of a Pokemon Mystery Dungeon spin-off series. Such a game could provide an alternative take on the series with more intelligent monsters that have their own society and methods of communication. In this world, the monsters could team up, do battle, and do adventures. In addition, in playing through the story, players could figure out new battle strategies, potentially devising ways to use monsters' abilities in combinations with one another. This hypothetical game could provide an adventure from an interesting perspective focused solely on the monsters. And that's probably a better idea, where you're maybe taking care of like a young, Rathalos or something. You are the young Rathalos and you're kind of like fighting your way up, getting older, more powerful, all those kind of things. That is an interesting premise, to say the least. Lastly, the article does mention that Monster Hunter games are a lot of fun as is, and the series rife with opportunities for future spin-offs. When it comes to the next step for the Monster Hunter franchise, breaking the mold is going in a new direction could be the key to expanding the success of Monster Hunter Now and Monster Hunter Stories are two examples of the franchises being open to experiments. There's still plenty of potentials that could be covered in the future. Spin-offs could be a vital part of the Monster Hunter, or even better. I'm surprised that they didn't mention a fighting game with monsters, or a kaiju Godzilla type game where you're just basically fighting as big creatures, destroying everything that you can. There's been multiple games like that already, not necessarily for Monster Hunter, of course, but games with that similar intent. You're the big bad monster, you can do whatever it is that you want, and basically destroy the world around you. At the same time, I think some type of fighting game as the monsters themselves could potentially be interesting. Now, of course, whether a Kuluyaku could ever step up to like a Devil Joe or anything like that would be an interesting fight, to see the least. But so this is probably where a traditional fighting game wouldn't necessarily work. But we have seen like Clay Fighters, for example, back in the SNES days, where again, monsters not necessarily being traditionally something you would expect to see in a fight. They just end up kind of going at each other in a different fight kind of like scenario, not in the traditional Street Fighter sense, but something a little bit different, and you end up having a lot of fun with that, whether it is fully fleshed out or anything like that, or does it actually work. It's interesting to see. Certainly I do get the idea of like Jurassic Park Evolution and Evolution 2. I think something like that with Monster Hunter does provide an interesting idea, and I believe that is the second thing. The live simulator gameplay, or maybe even the first one that he spoke about in this article, does make me think or give me those Monster Hunter vibes in that regard. But once again, huge shout out to, once again, interesting articles from Game Rant from Devin and his friend on how Capcom can still expand the Monster Hunter franchise. If you're brand new to my channel, though, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Hit the bell to receive notifications when the videos go up. And as always, thank you so much for watching. See ya.